Hey guys, welcome back to another Runeterrable radio video. Here we've got a special one. It is going to be the first open beta patch notes, or real content balance patch notes that we've got for the open beta. And I wanted to go over the changes and talk a little bit about my thoughts on that. On those changes and really just kind of go maybe not too in-depth on it, but just give a high-level overview of the patch notes and my thoughts on it. And we'll be talking much more about this on the show. So if you don't catch the show, make sure you do head over to Runeterrable.com or DeckPics.live or Discord.me/Runeterrable Radio and listen to the episodes there. So let's get right into it and talk about this first balance patch. All right, first up, they are going to bring us a bunch of updates in the beta along with some tweaks, the XP and Expedition rewards, and they've got some notes going over what they're changing and why. So here is the overall flow of what they're changing in this very first patch. First off, they're saying when they're looking at balance, they're going to consider changes that they have at a high level and some aspirational targets they want to hit in the long term. All right. This is also a message from Ruben Zoo that you can read for yourself. I'll leave it up here on the page for a bit. And of course, you can check the patch notes on the Legends of Runeterra website as well, playruneterra.com. So I won't read these out for you. We'll do that on the podcast, but since this is a video, I know you guys can read. A couple of things that stand out to me is they're reiterating that every champion should have a deck that they feel like is their best fit or their dream can be realized. So I'm thinking Vladimir, wanting to be in that self-damage deck, Teemo wanting to be in the puff cap deck, etc. Regions should have at least one competitively viable deck. That is something that we talked about on the show early on as something that we weren't really sure what that was going to mean, and already I think we can kind of say with relative confidence that is happening. I can think of a deck with Demacia, Ionia, Shadow Isles, P&Z. Noxus is kind of close to not being on the list, but I think, depending on what the metrics are, it definitely is there. And then the meta should support the widest possible array of competitively viable decks. Again, that's sort of a subjective, right? What is the widest possible array? We don't know. That could be 2 decks. Who knows? All right, so once they're out of beta, they're going to be in a regular cadence, and releasing new sets should look something like this. This is interesting and new here. 1, new sets of cards are released, then there's going to be a first balance patch, mostly medium-sized number of changes based on early outliers. The second balance patch is going to have significant updates to underutilized cards, and the main patch where you can expect any major champion updates. So first patch is only going to be hitting outliers. Second patch is going to be hitting underutilized cards and where you might see some of your underutilized champions get major updates. And then the third balance patch is going to have a limited number of changes just to stabilize any meta issues. And the next set of cards is going to be released. So again, they've left it pretty open here for interpretation as well as for changing, but that is a message from our live balance lead, Steve Rubin Zoo. All that sounds really good. It's very interesting and good, I think, in a lot of ways. So excited to see where that pans out. All right, let's get in to some animations. This is just some deck builder animations. Sorry for the poorly cropped photo here on it, but you can take a look at what these UI and deck builder animation changes are. Not super interesting to talk about, though. So if you want to read through them, check out the website or pause the video here and read. All right, we've got our champion changes. So Lux is going at level 1 from 3 power to 4 power and from 4 health to 5 health. So going from a 3-4 to a 4-5. And then at level 2 is appropriately also getting the +1/+1, going from 4-5 to a 5-6. The comment here is Lux's weaker stat line made it too difficult to utilize her as a linchpin build around me card. Buffing her stats will help her ability to stick. Help her ability to both stick around as an engine and act as a meaningful threat on her own. It definitely makes sense. Lux is probably one of the champions I've seen the least in terms of any play at all, which is sad because I got 3 of her very early on. So definitely want to see her played more. At the end of the day, a lot of things in Legends of Runeterra right now come down to stats. So +1/+1 change is definitely going to be big for her. I think her ability is an interesting one, and again, is definitely, like they said in this description, a build around me type of effect. So you are going to want to build around her, but when you've got such a weak stat line, you're really not going to. It's really not going to be good in a lot of ways, just simply because of the stats. I do think. I mean, 3 is definitely a break point for health. A lot of spells do 3. I'm thinking of Spear and Get Excited, both doing 3. So, I mean, even having 4 health is big, but having that 5 health allows you to block a little bit better and then also survive something, maybe block 2 times. And Lux is obviously the type of champ that you want to have around. So, definitely a small change. Not sure how much it's going to make a difference for her, but it is definitely a... obviously, it's a buff, and hopefully we'll see a little bit more Lux in play here. Next up, we've got Yasuo, and level up requirement for Yasuo is going from 6 units stun or recalled down to 5. They say, while testing Ionia changes internally, we found that Yasuo was catching collateral damage from changes aimed at elusive and hand buff decks, which we'll talk about in a second. Inspiring Mentor was one of the best cards to utilize while leveling up Yasuo, and together with Deny would provide pivotal protection for Yasuo. We found it's often difficult to level up Yasuo in expeditions, especially when not paired with Noxus. The quest buff should address both issues. So, a little bit of a change to Yasuo. I agree with this. Yasuo is definitely one of is a strong champion to build around, but it is tough to level him up. I did think that 6 was tough, especially in expeditions. So it's all around feels good. I don't know if it's enough to make Yasuo competitively viable, but he does have a very interesting build around deck. I think there's some good cards that, I mean, recalling and stunning is just a good ability inherently, and having Yasuo there is definitely a strong champion to build around as well. So we're gonna have to wait and see. I don't suspect that this is going to be a huge changer in terms of Yasuo's playability and constructed, but it will certainly make me second guess picking him up early in expeditions. All right, got our followers and spells. These are where the big ones are coming. First up is back-to-back is going from 5 to 6 cost. And the developer comments are, one of the things that we love about Legends of Runeterra is combat tricks. Is that combat tricks are very playable in our constructed format, which really contributes to compelling interactive gameplay moments. That said, back-to-back can be a huge blowout burst speed trick that often leaves opponents without profitable avenues of playing around it. We like this kind of effect, but such a swingy card ultimately warrants a higher cost. Agree entirely with this one. It being a burst spell, I think, is probably the biggest contributor to it. The fact that you can bank spell mana, effectively making it cost 2 before, now it costs 3 of your mana for the turn, in addition to banking spell mana, is a little bit better. I do think that this is still going to be super strong. I think it probably pulls it back one copy in constructed, and you still pretty much want to play as many of these as you can get in limited, up to a certain number, obviously. But back to back is still going to be really good. The burst speed giving 6+6+6 in stats across 2 allies is just it's a huge blowout. So I like the cost increase. Don't think it's actually going to change much. Next one here is Arena Battlecaster is getting a health buff from 1 up to 2. Battlecaster isn't seeing a ton of play, so it's getting a small buff to help it line up better with other 2-drops and make it a more compelling option for Noxus decks. This, I think, was definitely needed. 2 health is a small breaking point. You know, when you're trading with all of those 1/1s for 1 that provide extra effects. I'm thinking Omen Hawk, and a lot of the Ionia cards. It just feels bad to have 1 health, like, and not to mention Vile Feast as well, and Spiders. I mean, there's just the list goes on. I'm just thinking of these off the top of my head. The list goes on as to the reasons that you want 2 health instead of 1. So definitely, I definitely think that this is going to help the Arena Battlecaster, mostly in Expedition. It's not really going to impact Constructed. There has not been a deck that really utilizes the Arena Battlecaster yet, as I think that there are better options in other regions for aggressive decks. So I'm not sold on the Arena Battlecaster in Constructed yet, but I do think it's going to be a fine pickup in Expedition now, or at least not a terrible one. All right, next up is the Crimson Curator. Battle Scars decks have been underperforming, and the Noxus side of the theme has been a bit one-dimensional. Improving Crimson Curator should increase both options and viability for these decks. I mean, again, the Crimson cards all revolve around surviving damage, so increasing their health is certainly going to be big. Those cards don't even really have that big of a payoff. Some of them kind of do, but not even a ton. And with many of those cards being like 2 and 3 mana, like 2 3s or 3 2s or 3 3s, you're not really getting a huge payoff for that. So keep buffing them. I'm fine with it. I don't think it's super, like, I think Vlad maybe has some playability, but in Constructed, but a lot of those extra cards in Noxus especially don't really make that big of a difference. All right, here are some of the bigger ones. We've talked about this on the show, and this is much debated, a massively debated card, and that is Deny. Deny is going from 3 cost up to 4. And their comment is that Deny is moving from Watchlist to Changelist after rigorous internal testing and debate. While there are good arguments for Deny to exist at 3 mana, ultimately it's proven too prevalent and disruptive to the metagame, heavily restricting viable card options. When testing this change internally, we found that play patterns involving Deny tended to feel more fair. Holding up Deny now always costs at least 1 mana per turn that you otherwise would be used to develop your board, a cost that makes for more involved decision making than when Deny was fully castable with spell mana. After having played with and against Deny for the few weeks that we've had the open beta, I definitely agree with the mentality of this change. I think having Deny as a card that exists is good. I do think that having it cost 1 of your mana for the turn is definitely a good change. Having it just always be there, once you get your 3 spell mana, you pretty much, like, the opportunity cost was never there. And we talked about this on the show with Charmer, actually, that this card is just a plus tempo card because you can you essentially pay for this with mana that you're not spending on earlier turns, right? That's what spell mana is. So having the ability to, have a good, have a strong like 3-drop, for instance, Fiora is now going to have to wait an extra turn to be able to protect with Deny. Heimerdinger as well, going to need to wait an extra turn because you can't just on turn 5 already have built up your spell mana and then have the Deny backup. So you're going to have to wait an additional turn to have that safety net for your drops, which I think is probably good in general. And I think overall the effectiveness of Deny at sort of being a check to the, the War Mother's calls, the judgments of the format is certainly there, because you're still going to have Deny as a defensive option. It's now going to be slightly worse as an offensive option in that protecting your offensive threat is going to be harder and is going to cost you a little bit more. So I think my thought process on Deny and my opinion of Deny has changed having played with it and against it for 3 weeks. So I think overall this is a good change here. Inspiring Mentor is the next one up, and Inspiring Mentor is changing here. Health is actually getting a buff from 1 up to 2. The old text gave an ally in hand +1/+1, and now it will only give an ally in hand +1/+0. Inspiring Mentor was providing too much curve efficiency and resilience to the Ionia decks. The stats granted to the buffed unit, often overly protecting them by putting them out of range of similarly costed removal spells. Curving Inspiring Mentor into one or even 2 4/3 Navori Conspirators was too powerful. A play pattern considering its consistency. With this change, we're ensuring an intended weakness of elusive units, their low health, that can be more exploitable. Pretty straightforward. I think they hit the nail on the head, and I'm glad that they went after this card as well as some other cards that we'll talk about in a second, because this was sort of the linchpin that was keeping these decks really good. Putting your cards, your elusive spells out of Mystic Shot range, or out of Avalanche range, or out of Get Excited range, or Black Spear. Any of these removal spells, just getting them out of that range so cheaply and efficiently, and not even that with the Navori Conspirator, literally just a combo in and of itself that's just so good and consistent. It makes so much sense. If they would just have reduced the power of some of the elusive units, I think it would have been missing the mark a bit. And this change specifically makes me really confident in what the balance team is doing. I think Inspiring Mentor was the boogeyman for a lot of these decks. Granted, you do have, it is still very good. The elusive cards are still very good. And Inspiring Mentor is also still quite good, but this really does change sort of their goals here. So Inspiring Mentor might not even see play anymore, because giving the extra power was never really the reason. I mean, it was a good side effect, but it was really, hey, I can get my Conspirator out of Mystic Shot range. I can get my Kinkou Lifeblade out of Get Excited range. Like a 3/4 Kinkou Lifeblade is just so huge. Like we talked about before, 3 is a really big break point for these. For the 3 health is a very big break point for these decks. So really like this change, and I think it will certainly shape the elusive deck moving forward in a different way. Next one up is Jeweled Protector. This change is complementary to the one made with Inspiring Mentor, as we don't want to over-nerf the hand buff archetype. Shifting power from Mentor to Protector and into later parts of the game should increase deck building options and give opponents a bit more time to react to set up their own game plans. Jeweled Protector is one of those cards that I just never really liked. A 3-mana or a 5-mana 3/3 was always just such a weak option, even in Expedition. Though giving a unit +3/+3 is very good. The problem being that a lot of times with the elusive deck, you want to give a cheap unit a cheap elusive unit, the +3/+3, which doesn't work out because you need to cast this expensive unit first. So it kind of lines up in a weird way. Now at least you're going to get a 4/4 out of the deal. It's a card I've used to, moderate success in Expedition. So I like it. It's power level there, but in Constructed, I think it's certainly not going to get there. But it is, I think their reasoning makes sense. Take it away from the early game, give it into the late game makes sense to me. All right. Speaking of Kinku Lifeblade, it is getting its health changed from 3 down to 2. We previously mentioned that we've been keeping an eye on elusive strategies and working to identify any specific candidates to adjust. One of the intended weaknesses of elusive decks is that fast decks should be able to effectively erase them, since elusive units are naturally smaller and less cost efficient. Kinku Lifeblade often closed that door on what would be a fundamental weakness of the deck, so we're adjusting its stats to decrease blocking power and make it easier for opposing decks to answer. Again, 3 down to 2 is a breakpoint. 3 up to 4 is a breakpoint. It's now going to be much harder to get the Kinku Lifeblade to that 4 health. It's not going to be able to block 2/2s or 2 power creatures on the back end. And it's going to be harder to make it a just gigantic, Baneslayer Angel, for those of you who have played Magic, type of card where you just can't ever race it. So definitely a good change here. I look forward to being able to Mystic Shot some naked Kinku Lifeblades in my future. The next one here is another big contested and talked about card. It is Commander Ledros. Cost is going from 8 up to 9. Power is going from 8 up to 9. The old text says cut the enemy Nexus health in half. The new text says cut the enemy Nexus health in half, rounded up. So really just a clarification from the text standpoint. But Commander Ledros is an extremely powerful game-ending bomb that also acts as a recursive threat and is flexible to boot, offering both excellent stabilization in close games and closeout potential for aggro decks that might have otherwise come up short. Overall, Ledros was a bit too good at undoing whatever previously happened in the game, especially for a card that doesn't require any synergy at all to be effective. A card that does so much should incur a higher opportunity cost and provide opponents more room to win before it's supposed to be dropped. So we're bumping the cost up to 9, which will not only delay Ledros' arrival, but also allow flexibility when it comes to recasting it. To partially compensate, we're bumping Ledros' power by 1. If it connects, it should be ending the game. I almost want Commander Ledros to go up to a 10 cost, honestly. I do think that all of the things that they said are true. Commander Ledros is a very effective card at closing out a game. I honestly don't know if this change really matters that much. It does make it come out 1 turn later, which is certainly good in taking it out. But I think based on what they're saying, they're like, we want this super powerful effect that should end the game quickly. I almost want that to be at the end of the game. Give it an extra turn. I think this is an incremental change, and I think we're going to probably see a lot of the same play patterns with Ledros, him being 8 costed versus 9. So I would not be surprised if Ledros gets bumped up to a 10 cost at some point, but we're going to have to wait and see. I do think that this is certainly going to reduce his effect. It is absolutely going to reduce his effectiveness. I just don't know by how much. All right, Rasa also getting a nerf here, going from 7 cost up to 8. Rasa offers consistent blowout potential across many matchups, and the required setup is cheap to achieve in Shadow Isles. This often makes Rasa difficult for opponents to profitably play around and can leave them in a rough state where they know they're going to get Rasa'd, but there isn't much that they can do about it. The rate was just too favorable, so we're bumping Rasa up to 8 mana in order to give opponents more room to play against it. Very similar to what we saw with back-to-back and somewhat what we saw with Ledros here. This type of blowout effect should cost more. What I really like and what we've seen consistently across a couple of these changes is the line profitably play around. It is, as a Magic player, that is a very, very good thing to hear. They are balancing cards around not just inherent power level, but the power level when you're playing correctly around them, right? We see many times in Hearthstone as well as other newer games that cards are balanced around just, oh, a new player plays this, how good is it? Okay, it's too good in the hands of a new player in the new player meta, let's nerf it. When actually you can play around something and it's not that good. It is very reassuring. Even as someone who's not going to be playing super competitively, it is good to know that they're going to be, that they have that in mind as developers. And I'm not surprised that that's the case. It's just very reassuring that that is, considering that a lot of the player or the team are former pro players. So very happy about that. And in terms of Rasa specifically, agree. Again, I really almost want to see Rasa go up again. It's such a good effect. She is the type of card, or actually I don't know if Rasa's what Rasa identifies as, but Rasa is a card that is the type of card that you need to almost build your deck around, like build your deck around knowing that you're going to have to play around it. So you want some sort, like spiders all of a sudden start getting better, and you want to save spiders against your Shadow Isles opponent so that the Rasa can eat the spiders rather than just trading them away. So it does promote different play patterns, which I like, and it rewards people for playing around it, which I like. And it was just a little bit too strong at 7, so I do like it at 8. Scuttlegeist is now gaining the keyword fearsome. They're removing some raw power from Shadow Isles with other changes, as it's just doing too many things too well. On the other hand, they do want to help players build more synergy-driven Shadow Isles decks, so we're providing a few small buffs to Scuttlegeist and Tortured Prodigy to make them more compelling options for those kinds of decks. So the kill your own guys decks are now getting a few more options, with Scuttlegeist gaining fearsome, Tortured Prodigy gaining an additional power from 3 up to 4. I've liked Scuttlegeist a decent amount in these decks in Expedition. I don't know if it's close to being strong enough to make it into Constructed. I mean, we saw it's basically Corridor Creeper from Hearthstone, which was an absolutely insanely good card. Obviously, the world is a very different place between Hearthstone and Legends of Runeterra, so Scuttlegeist has not quite made it up to that power level, but I think nonetheless, Scuttlegeist is pretty close, and I think this change obviously pushes it a little bit more. I think it's definitely good in Expedition as well. Wraithcaller is now losing fearsome. Wraithcaller has been a dominant card for the fearsome-based decks. The combination of 2 bodies boosting all Mist Wraiths and evasion made this among the most efficient cards in Legends of Runeterra. Considering the free Mist Wraith already comes with fearsome, we're cutting the keyword from Wraithcaller to reduce the amount of evasion and overall value it puts on the board. Yeah, I mean, just a thumbs up there. Never needed fearsome. It was already extremely good. Just a big thumbs up there, even as someone who liked playing that deck. All right, now that's the end of those changes. We've now got the watch list. Fearsome is on the watch list. Legends of Runeterra is built around a central pattern of interactive, interesting combats. Most of the reasons we're keeping an eye on elusive decks and ultimately made some changes is that when firing on all cylinders, they removed much of that interactivity. In large concentrations, fearsome can have a similar impact. Once it becomes very difficult to block, the points of interaction shrink and a lot of the interesting back and forth in games disappears. For now, we think the changes in this patch, plus some existing tools, provide some counter pressure on fearsome, but we'll be keeping an eye on those units and their supporting cards. I mean, agree. Fearsome is inherently uninteractive, and until you have at least you have the option to interact with it by buffing your guys, or essentially by buffing your own team to be able to block. So good that it's still on the watch list. Control. Collectively, the card updates in this patch represent a general reduction in the power of tools that aggressive and mid-range decks have to combat control strategies, specifically ways to reach inevitability. While control decks haven't been problematic so far during the beta, we'll be keeping an eye out to see if they've been overly powered up by these changes or their consequences. Again, nothing too controversial or crazy in that statement alone. I do like that they're thinking at least about the consequences of their changes. So just a big thumbs up to the team there, and actually having, the forethought to think about the changes that they're making. All right, they are now adding some clarity. I think this is a huge change, a huge quality of life change. They've heard the feedback that it's hard to tell whether units effects allow opponents to react or not, so they've added some info to the tooltips. Now we're basically going to be getting a skills icon next to the play or attack in the card text. So we're going to have a little icon that shows, hey, when you play this, like Rasa, for instance, when you play this card, it's going to create a skill that comes out and can be countered. Created cards now have a tooltip that tells both players what created them. So just some clarity and quality of life upgrades there. Huge thumbs up. Expedition archetypes. They're going to talk about some specific archetypes that they're changing here. Demacian Steel is currently overperforming. I have personally experienced that with a lot of my 7-win expeditions coming from Demacian Steel specifically. So they've added Chain Vest to it to dilute the power of that archetype. I do think it is going to dilute it a bit, but Chain Vest is a reasonable card to have a one of, or maybe a 2 of in a deck, like with Fiora, but it is certainly worse than a lot of the other cards in Demacian Steel. So I do like this very small change to just dilute the power level a little bit. Battle Scars has been proving great at pumping up the power of its units, but could have a tough time actually closing out games. So the addition of Might will allow those units to go over the top of opposing blockers. Alpha Wild Claw is also being swapped for Bull Elnuck to give the archetype a bit of a stronger late game. So they've added Might and Alpha Wild Claw, reduced Blood for Blood and Bull Elnuck. I mean, just some little changes here, and I won't even go through the rest of these. I do think what's interesting here, again, Suit Up has been overperforming due to the consistency of challenger units. So they swap. This is where the Bull Elnuck for Alpha Wildclaw has been changed again. Shroom and Boom has been struggling lately, so they're going to remove some bad cards and add some better cards. And they're also going to be changing and improving the Shopkeeper trade logic. So not a ton to talk about here, but some good changes overall. Glad to know that they are, constantly and still looking at the expedition logic and cards in the packs, where something like Hearthstone Arena seems like it got ignored pretty early on and was not touched for quite some time. All right, they're also going to be changing the experience and expedition rewards. Here are the list of changes. Overall, the XP at the end of trial is going down, and they're reducing the XP adjustments for daily PvP wins, but you'll now receive more XP at high numbers of PvP wins in one day. You'll also receive at least 100 XP for constructed PvP wins. So they're also changing XP for friend challenges, and we're also now changing. They're moving a little bit of the shards in a 7-win expedition down to a 6-win. So now 6 wins is going to give you 1,500 shards instead of 1,000. and 7 win is going to give you 3,000 shards instead of 3,500. So slightly better for 6 wins, and 7 wins is slightly worse. But I think overall, I mean, I do want to be able to go infinite, so to speak. So at some point, I'd ideally like it to be at 6 wins, but I think it's probably a little bit too easy in general to get 6 wins. Just not even because it's an easy game, but because with the you can reset your losses by getting a win. You can go win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. Makes it a little bit easier than in general. So they probably don't want that to be going infinite. So I like that they're giving a little bit back to the 6 win instead of the 7th, but overall I think it's probably fine. I don't like that they're getting rid of the end of trial, or they're reducing the end of trial XP. I really liked that, but I'm not going to complain too much about it. All right, then there's some miscellaneous changes, which I won't go over, but you can either pause the video or take a look in the patch notes for these. Some bug fixes as well, and I believe that is it for the video. So what did you guys think? Leave a comment below here. Make sure to like and subscribe as well. Check out discord.me/Runeterrable Radio and to find out everything that we're doing with the show, and make sure that you are following us everywhere. You can find all the links at discord.me/Runeterrable Radio, Runeterrable.com, or DeckPics.live. Want to hear your feedback on this? Do you like these kind of videos? Should we just leave it for the episodes? Do you want both? Do you want neither? Well, you're getting it on the episode one way or the other, so don't say neither. But let us know what you think, and we will see you guys in a couple of days with the brand new episode. We'll see ya.